The movie starts off with two people making love in a bedroom. After that, Ronnie, who's the guy, feels sick and vomits. Ray, the lady, comforts him by telling him he'd be alright. In the next scene, Lazarus talks to Reverend RL about a girl he knew some time ago. The Reverend prays for Lazarus and leaves. Lazarus then walks into a restaurant and sits at a table with Rose. They order coffee and talk about getting their divorce. However, things get heated up and they fight. Ronnie and Ray go out to get a lift. Ray coughs and Ronnie tries to calm her down. However, Ray freaks out over Ronnie and tells him their plans aren't going to work. Ronnie reassures Ray that they're going to work out their distance problem. He does this by giving Ray a watch and telling her that his watch and hers would beep at the same time. When it does, they'd be thinking about each other. He then kisses her before leaving for town. Ronnie leaves an emotional Ray who runs after Ronnie's car. Ray stays on the grass and acts funny as if she was in the mood. The next scene shows her making love with a buff guy in a room. They finish their business and Ray asks the man for her money. The man gives her money and drops her on the way. She then walks to town coughing along the way. Meanwhile, Lazarus pays a little boy for his service to the farm and drives his tractor to Rose's rose farm. He stares at the roses and cuts them all down. At night, Lazarus is at a bar drinking when a woman flaunts her new boots. Lazarus cuts into her conversation and is tempted by the woman. Lazarus refuses to be cajoled and moves on. Just then, Rose's new boyfriend, Dickie, walks in and tries to reconcile with Lazarus. Laz takes this personally and tries to hit Dickie's face with a beer bottle. He then walks out of the bar and goes home. That night, Ray is seen with two other friends talking about Ronnie. Her other friend comes in and gives her a bottle of vodka. Just then, their drug plug arrives and sells them some drugs. Ray takes them and gets high. Meanwhile, Laz is at his home breaking things to cope with the pain he feels from his failed marriage. He throws out some stuff and goes to his guitar, tunes it and sings passionately. As he sings, some people are seen on a field playing football. Ray runs to a truck and is chased by a guy who makes love with her on the ground. Laz finishes his song and sleeps off. Ray passes out on the pitch as Ronnie's friend, Gil, picks her up and drives her home. As she wakes, Gil stops on the way and talks to her about the affairs she's been having with guys around town. Gil tries to make love to her and gets annoyed when she compares him to Tehran. He punches her out of anger and she passes out again. He tries to wake up wasted Ray but fails. He then kicks her out of the truck and drives away. Just then, both watches beep, and Ronnie is woken up by his comrades in the army. In the morning, Lazarus is woken up by a call from the Reverend's father. He tells Lazarus that he was informed of his encounter between him and Deke. Laz doesn't deny and asks what the priest thought. The priest says he's justified for doing that and says Laz should come to church every once in a while and cuts the call. Lazarus walks out of his house and takes out the trash. As he's taking out the trash, something else grabs his attention in the woods and he tries to check it out. He then runs and sees knocked out Ray still on the ground. He checks her out and just then, Ray coughs out and Lazarus carries her back to his home. Ray keeps saying Tehran while Lazarus covers her body and leaves the house for help. He arrives at a pharmacy and searches for some medication. The store owner, Angela, startles him and asks him why he wasn't in church. Laz makes up an excuse and asks Angela for some medication. Back at Lazarus's house, Ray slowly groans in pain when some footsteps are heard at Lazarus's entrance. Ray watches in horror as the blurry image of the man appears in front of her and tries to take advantage of her. Ray wakes up and finds out it was a dream. Back at the pharmacy, Angela gives Laz some drugs for free and explains to him how to use the drugs. Lazarus then leaves the pharmacy and drives to Tehran's place. He sees Tehran and asks for some privacy. Lazarus asks Tehran about Ray and he explains Ray's condition to Lazarus. Tehran tells Laz that Ray's a nymphomaniac and that he owns her. Lazarus understands, leaves Tyrone, and gets back to his house. He finds Ray on the floor and holds her up to care for her wounds. Ray tries to make love to Lazarus and he recoils in shock. He carries his Bible and runs outside his house. As Ray continues screaming inside, Laz opens to a particular Bible verse, gets back into the house, and fills his bathtub with some ice. He puts Ray in the tub and tells her to manage the cold so her fever gets down. Ray eventually falls asleep in the tub and Laz sits with her. In the next scene, we hear the watch beeping again. However, Ray is on a plantation this time looking for Ronnie. She flashes back to her making love with Ronnie and shouts his name. As she shouts his name, Lazarus comes to her aid. He takes her back inside and puts her back to sleep. As she sleeps, he walks outside and plays his guitar again and he gets some chains from a box in his garage. In the morning, Laz checks out his crops while playing some music. He enters his house to take a drink when Ray finally wakes up after 2 days. They both discuss what happened to her the night Laz found her. Ray insists she doesn't want to talk about it and proceeds to leave. She, however, finds herself in chains. She freaks out and tells Laz to remove the chains. Laz refuses to and asks her why she allows herself to get used by men so much. Ray explains that it's none of Lazarus's business and Lazarus gets fed up with her attitude. He explains to her that he's not taking the chains off her unless she's alright again. Lazarus then says he has to cleanse her of her illness. Ray freaks out and pushes Lazarus down. She runs outside until she exhausts the chains she has left. She then screams for help as she tries to free herself of the chains. Lazarus gets up and drags her back to the house with a lot of resistance from Ray. He finally gets her to come in and offers her some food which Ray eats voraciously. Later that evening, Laz takes Ray out on a walk. When they get back, Lazarus rubs some ointment on Ray's wounds and pours out his heart to a surprised Ray. Ray pushes him back as he presses hard on her wound. Lazarus apologizes to Ray and she explains that she understands his predicament and that what he needs is to make love with her. She tries to tempt Laz but he doesn't succumb to her act and walks out. Disappointed, Ray goes back to her bed and tries to get some sleep. Something hits her again and she feels uncomfortable. She manages to tie the chains around her body and sleeps perfectly. The next morning, Lazarus parks his car at a clothing shop and talks briefly with the locals. He enters the shop and meets with the shopkeeper. He then buys some decent clothes for Ray. Meanwhile, Ray gets more restive at Laz's home. She tries to open her chains and light up a cigarette. She fails at opening the chains and sits down for a smoke. At the pharmacy, Laz gives Angela some farm produce and lotion to thank her for helping him the other time. Just then, a boy named Lincoln comes looking for Lazarus at his house. Ray hears and tries to open the door. However, she stops when something stops her body from opening the door and Lincoln gets back on his way. Before he goes far, he hears something back at Lazarus's house. He then walks back and opens Laz's door. Ray, who's already in heat, charges Lincoln to make love with him. Just then, Lazarus arrives in his semi-truck and enters the house. He catches Lincoln and Ray making love and he throws Lincoln out of his house. Reverend R.L. visits Lazarus and Laz tells him to stop visiting him. The Reverend says no and asks what's wrong with Laz. Lazarus tries to scare off the Reverend but he fails. After much pressure from R.L., Lazarus takes him in to see Ray. R.L. is shocked and tells Laz that Ray was not the kind of lady and he should be making love with her. Lazarus tells R.L. that he hasn't laid a finger on that girl. R.L. believes him and asks Lazarus if he's informed the police about the case. Laz says he can't call the police and R.L. asks him why the chains are around her waist. Laz says she just needs someone who can talk some sense into her head. R.L. reluctantly follows up when Laz tells him to stay for supper. Lazarus then walks to meet Lincoln. He apologizes for throwing him out of his house and discusses it with him. Back at Laz's living room, R.L. discusses with Ray about Jesus Christ and heaven. As they reach an agreement, R.L. asks Ray what her heaven is and she replies, Ronnie. Meanwhile, Ronnie comes back to town and enters a bar. He sees his friend, Gil, and buys a beer. Gil asks him why he's home so early. Ronnie explains that he has an anxiety disorder and couldn't shoot, so they send him packing. Ronnie then asks Gil about the whereabouts of Ray. Gil says he doesn't know about her location. Just then, Ray puts on some decent clothes and goes to meet Laz in the kitchen. There's music in the background when Lazarus finishes up dinner. Laz asks Ray for a hand in the kitchen when Ray explains she doesn't know how to cook. Laz then asks her to boil water, which she does. At night, Laz, Ray, Reka and R.L. get together and eat dinner peacefully. Meanwhile, Ronnie and Gil arrive at Ray's house. Ronnie is worried as he doesn't find Ray at her house. Ronnie and Gil get into a quarrel over how good his life was when he was with Ray. Ronnie says Ray has been faithful since they got together and Gil tells him the truth about Ray. The two get into a fight and Ronnie beats Gil up badly. Ronnie then takes Gil's truck and drives off. Back at Lazarus's apartment, Ray and Laz drink to freedom. Lazarus finally frees Ray from the chains and Ray asks him to play his guitar for her, which he does. He tells her the story of how his wife grew out of love for him. Rain starts and Ray gets scared. She tells Laz to keep playing the guitar so she doesn't freak out from her hallucinations. The next morning, Laz drives Ray to town and asks her if she's ready to leave. She says she is and walks out of the car to get some stuff from the supermarket. By the car, Angela greets Laz and they giggle. Back at the supermarket, Ray sees her mother, Kel, and tries to reconcile with her. Kel is surprised and rejects Ray's request to get coffee. Ray accuses her mother of letting her father abuse her while she was younger. She rages later on and throws food items at her mother. Meanwhile, Lazarus was busy listening to Angela sing a melodious song when he sees people gathering outside the supermarket Ray's in. He runs in and sees people trying to restrain Ray. He carries Ray but is cut off on the way when Angela asks him if Ray was his niece. He ignores her and just walks off. Back at home, Laz helps Ray take a bath and calms her down. That night, Lazarus watches Ray and combs up his hair. He then tells Ray to get dressed as they get to a bar. As they get out of the car, her watch beeps. She turns off the alarm and hears the same beep some meters away. Laz asks her what's wrong and she says nothing. In the bar, Lazarus meets RL and the two discuss. After some beer, Lazarus picks up his guitar and performs on stage. The whole bar enjoys his music as Ray joins in on the fun. Lazarus continues playing the guitar as Ray dances her heart out. Ronnie stares at the dance floor from outside the bar. The next morning, Laz wakes up and sees Ray playing Let It Shine on the guitar. Laz asks how she was feeling and she says she has a hangover. Laz tells her she knows how to play as he helps her remember Let It Shine. Ray sings the entire song with her eyes closed. Just then, Ronnie walks in and knocks out Lazarus thinking Laz slept with Ray. Ronnie then points a gun at Laz who confronts Ronnie to push the trigger. Ronnie pulls back and Ray helps him calm down. Laz gets up and calls in RL. The next scene shows Ronnie talking to RL in Ray's presence. Ronnie tells the father how much he wants to see Ray well again. When it's Ray's turn to speak, Ray expresses her feelings and tells the father the spell she has when she gets the hallucinations. She also explains that she loves Ronnie a lot and he's the only person who calms her down when she hallucinates. She also begs Ronnie not to quit on her as she would be lost without him. Later on, Laz drives to Angela's place and asks for her help again. The next scene shows Ronnie trying to knot a tie when Lincoln walks him and helps him out as his best man. Meanwhile, the bride, Ray, is revealed and Lazarus assures her that she could do this. Later on, Ronnie and Ray get married. After the wedding, they drive off in Laz's van as Laz and Angela are seen holding hands. On the road, Ronnie drives when a truck honking at him gives him a panic attack. He pulls over and Ray does the sweetest thing ever to calm him down. She sings Let It Shine into his ears as he comes back to his normal self,